Hello and welcome to season 3 of Phrasally Verbocious ELT podcast. Chris, we're on season 3.
That means people are still listening to us.
That means people are sort of listening, but we're still talking. Yeah.
Okay, I'll rephrase. It means that I'll rephrase. It means that we're still talking.
We're still talking to each other. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Anyway. Today, we are going to talk about our language journeys and how that has helped our teaching. Believe it or not, we do have an entire season already planned out. So, today we're going to talk about our language journeys. So, the journeys we have been on and how it has assisted our teaching in learning different languages. So, at the very start, we might as well just state. And then we'll go into it in detail towards the end of the podcast. So, Chris, what languages do you speak?
Well, believe it or not, my L1 is English.
It's more unbelievable when I say my L1 is English.
I also speak Welsh. I studied but no longer really speak French for a couple of years. I did German in high school and at uni, so I've got reasonable understanding of everyday German. Spanish, I live in Spain. I speak Spanish every day. And I'm currently having a bit of fun with Portuguese.
Nice. So for me, believe it or not, my L1 is English. I also... You don't need to laugh at that. This is not my teacher voice. Having lived in Spain and worked with Chris, I also speak Spanish. Through sheer necessity or interest, I got my A1 certificate in Irish not so long ago. I do have a GCSE in French and did study German in school. No recollection of either languages because that finished in about 2003. And now I am studying Norwegian for the crack.
Ah, okay. How do you find Norwegian?
Surprisingly similar to English. I mean, the Norse comes, it has influenced English.
The Germanic.
Anyway. Yeah.
And the Germanic language family helps.
Yeah, so surprisingly similar in many ways. The only issue I'm having is spelling for pronunciation. But if you can do Irish, you can do anything.
It's funny, spelling and pronunciation is the problems I'm having with Portuguese, but we'll leave that for maybe later in the pod. So I think maybe if we kick off talking about, we're going to make an assumption that lots of our listeners will work with monolingual groups. So, when the students all speak the same L1. And I guess there's a definite advantage to speaking their language when you're teaching a group of students that all speak the same language, right?
Oh, completely agree. Yeah, I would have graded my by the time I arrived in Spain, I probably would have graded my Spanish to be A2.
Okay.
So not a great A2, but still competent and aware of the issues. Because before I moved to Spain, I was told learn the grammar. So I got Grammatica in Uso. Which basically the big one, which basically was all grammar from A2 to B2 level, or A1 to B2 level Spanish. I got there and I was like, so I knew the grammar, but I'm sitting there going, "Jeez, I still can't have a conversation." So ironically, I learned it wrong. But I think with monolingual in the classroom, with monolingual students, with all our students have Spanish L1s. So yes, I mean speaking the language makes such a difference. Obviously, we're not going to on this podcast go into the discussion of using Spanish in the classroom because I don't actually think it's a discussion. Of course, it should be used, but it helps you so much more in knowing exactly what problems they're about to have, what problems they're about to face, what problems with pronunciation there may be, with writing. I mean, OUGH words in English are just an absolute disgrace.
I think that's true for speakers of most languages. But I think you're right in terms of anticipating what they're going to make mistakes with, in terms of your planning, but then also in the execution. then because obviously I quite like mistakes in my classroom. My students know that I get more excited about good mistakes than I do about good answers.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And,
good mistakes over good answers. Oh, that's really nice.
Definitely.
I really like that.
Because, I preempt the mistake, I let them make it, and I'm ready to explain why it's wrong. And I'm ready to explain why they've done it. I don't believe that we should be using our knowledge of the L1 to help them avoid those mistakes. They need to make them so they can learn from them.
Exactly.
You can see that my students are like one of the things about teaching. I'm not meant to be dating this, are we? We are teaching online, so I'm going to say it anyway. One of the things that I am enjoying about teaching online is seeing this grid of 9 or 10 faces. When they see my face, do my, oh, you made a good mistake face, because then I can see them all get ready. Like, oh, here we go. That was the wrong answer. And he's about to explain what we've done. And I thought, thank you, Mario, that was fantastic. Completely wrong. And let's talk about why. And then at the end, we'll go again. And thanks again. I'm really pleased you made that mistake, because it gave us opportunity to talk about it. But knowing what mistakes they're going to make in advance means that I'm ready with my explanations.
And that actually makes up a part of your class, because there's a learning session to be done through those mistakes that is going to happen.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things about that as well is, even though our students, their L1 is Spanish, we need to be aware of the regional Spanish as well. So you're in Madrid now, so would I be assuming that it's quite strong Castellano Spanish, whereas in Asturias the perfect tenses don't exist, because Asturiano has mixed in with the Spanish, and there's the Asturiano and the Bable discussion as well. So I remember introducing the perfect tenses last year. So in Castellano, it's perfectly fine to have it, but to some of the students I had to explain it in Spanish, what it is in Spanish, what it means in Spanish. And they go, oh yeah, I've seen that on TV. Like, yeah, you have.
We've encountered that in lengua, but I never say it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then here is what that is in English. By the way, European English speakers are going to be far more likely to use this in general. Although if you're watching American TV or YouTubers, there's a sentence I've never said before. It's less common. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And likewise, it's less common in Latin American Spanish. So down here or across in Cáceres as well, you can say, how in Latin America, when you watch Latin American shows, they don't really use the present perfect in the same way as you do. And they're like, yeah. Well, it's the same. In English, we use it, and in American English, they don't. And again, that's knowledge that I have, that I can help my students see a relationship or a pattern that otherwise I would not have been able to do. So I think understanding explaining errors and looking at what's going on is one thing. And then I think there's actually using it. I remember seeing a presentation a few years ago where someone was talking about specifically advantaging our students because they already have Spanish. And one of the great things about that was, like, he put a list of complicated vocabulary up on the screen in his talk, and sort of said, look at all this C1 vocabulary. From a C1 word list at the back of a course book. I guarantee that all of the 8-year-olds that you teach here in Spain will know what all those mean in Spanish, because they all come from Latin. So the fact that actually sometimes being some of the things that you think, oh, I should probably prepare that vocabulary beforehand because it's complicated. Well, actually, if it's Latinate, they may already know it.
Yeah, sometimes
and again,
it isn't.
Being able to spot. Exactly. And there's often vocabulary exercises in some of these books that Spanish students will fly through.
Yeah.
Because the words that the coursebook editor has chosen to pick out are all Latin based, and therefore relatively straightforward to Spanish speakers. I think knowing that, you can sort of give them all sorts of other tips and tricks to get through it. Like I have a display in my classroom with the endings, when we've got just basically the word is the same, but the ending is different. So if it ends in ocho in Spanish, it probably ends in us in English. So generoso is generous. And like knowing these patterns and sharing them.
Yeah, it makes so much more natural to connect the dots as well. Because if you can connect the dots with your L1, even if, say, something doesn't exist in your L1, you've actually a higher chance of remembering it rather than not making any connections whatsoever.
Exactly, because there's a connection with a lack.
Yeah,
oh, that's interesting. We can't say that in Spanish. Isn't it interesting that you can in English? Precisely. The way that, although the subjunctive annoys the hell out of me, it's fascinating the way that you can modulate what you're trying to say by using it. And you can express differing levels of certainty, not just with the choice of verb, but also the tense that you then put the verb in. I think that's a really useful way of using things in Spanish that we haven't got in English.
Or one of the ones I find quite interesting is, especially with Spanish speakers in the Romance languages, is the horror of phrasal verbs. Whereas actually, if you translate them, there's a lot of them that the Spanish do just have words for. So phrasal verb can just equal one vocabulary word, which is a way of making it easier. Now, obviously, in multilingual classes, it's a lot harder. But sometimes when you're doing phrasal verbs, especially if you're coming across like 8 or 10 in a textbook, if you have the phrasal verb, the meaning of said phrasal verb, but then the translation, if you add an extra column for their notebooks, it actually gets it goes a lot further, and they're going to remember it a lot more if they can make that connection as well.
Make that connection. And even just things like, and actually phrasal verbs is one that makes me laugh as well, because that's where I will sort of say, because I can't, phrasal verbs are so complicated, blah, 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 blah. And then apologies to the non-Spanish speakers in the audience of this pod, but I just say, excuse me, irse? So the difference being that ir means to go and irse means to go out. Hang on, that sounds an awful lot like a phrasal verb to me. So if I say boy, it means I go, and if I say me boy, it means I'm going out, I'm leaving. So actually, and then they go, see, better there. Yes, teacher. Yes, you're right. And there's actually a little bit of humor there as well, and like diffusing sort of the difficult things with humor, and also diffusing this idea of English as being simply monolithically difficult in some ways, and that Spanish is just easy. And like, no, it's easy because you speak it as your mother tongue. And like thinking about it that way, How have you found being an adult language learner has helped your teaching?
I think there's a lot of empathy comes into it. I made this incredibly stupid mistake about 10 years ago where it was becoming big business to get language graduates to work in IT. So the thinking was, if they can speak multiple languages, they will be able to learn multiple computing languages much easier. And I was the reverse of that. I was like, okay, so I can program in a dozen different computing languages. Can I pick up a human language? No. Doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that at all. So this very naive Egypt trying to pick up a second language. It's not like how a computer languages works, where you can click Control S and save things and then go away. I think a lot of it has turned into basically the best way I learned is what I say to students, because I don't, unless it's an exam class, I don't like to give homework. What I do give them is give yourself 30 minutes a day. Do something. Yeah, do something in your target language 30 minutes a day. That's why I don't have issue with the workbooks that you get with course books, but there is the issue with, I don't think that workbook should just be the homework. I think it should be a reference book for a grammar point the student is weak on, whereas they're going to get so much more language and use and, quite frankly, enjoyment out of finding something they're interested in for 30 minutes a day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that we're currently using with our students is an online reading platform. So there's a library of books at a different level, graded readers at different levels, and opening that up and setting them all up in that has been great. And some are not readers, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing as well. We got to, as teachers, we've got to be aware of. That's grand.
Just because I've been going through sort of 2 books a week recently doesn't mean that my students need to do the same thing. Because they might, they find their interest elsewhere, and that's absolutely fine. And we all know adults who read, and we all know adults that don't read. It's just that when we happen to be teachers, and especially teachers of language, we tend to be interested in reading, and using language in that way. But those that are into it have therefore been absolutely, swallowing books whole off of this platform. And well, dare I say it, they're going to get a lot more out of that than doing a grammar practice.
Yeah. I think
or at least a grammar practice in isolation.
Yeah, in isolation, I think is the important thing as well, because I got my adult B2s last year to have like learning diaries, so they would notice certain, say, grammar points or vocabulary areas or something that they were starting to struggle with, and then that was sort of them becoming aware of their language learning journey, as it were, and then going, okay, so maybe after 2 weeks they bring me the notepad or the page or whatever they had, and I was like, okay, I need help on X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, funnily enough, here's the resources that you could go and practice with or do, and I think that one of the things, especially with adult language learners, say they are in a B2 class, it's very this is in my experience, because I've done it in Spanish as well. You would assume that you needed the B2 book in front of you, but it's perfectly fine to use the A2 book as a reference, or to brush up on A2 level grammar or pronunciation or vocabulary or something. It's okay to go back. You can jump forward as well, but it is also okay to go back.
Yeah, and I also think the same thing when we've discussed, we were mentioning graded readers a minute ago, but I think the same thing is true with graded readers. It's perfectly all right and probably a good idea to read stuff from the level below.
Well, it depends what you're reading for. Is it explicit reading or implicit reading? So if you're looking to read for enjoyment, go to the level below. If you want to challenge yourself, use the level you're on or the level in front of you. But if you're doing it for enjoyment, I used to bring in the B2 graded reader books for the B1 graded readers for my B2 class, and they were going to like 4 a week, but they were enjoying it.
But this is what I mean. And that's where the emotional intelligence comes into it as well, because then there is that feeling of accomplishment of finishing a book, having enjoyed it, and not worrying too much about the level that's written on the outside of it. The fact is, you just read a book in English, or in my case, in Spanish. Yeah, and that's brilliant.
I still remember page for page the first Spanish book I finished. It was I would have been quite a strong B1 at the time, but I hadn't really read a book cover to cover, and it was an A2 book, and just that it was about 150, 160 pages or something. But see, when you get to the end of a book, like that is something. I was so pleased with myself. That was one of my biggest language learning goals. Like I was, you can read news articles and newspapers and the odd magazine article, but when you go cover to cover on a book in a different language, that's going somewhere.
I can remember doing that for the first time with Welsh. Actually, that was the first time I read books cover to cover was in Welsh, and it's a feeling of accomplishment, and it's, especially if you've got for me maybe we'll talk about this a little later on, but for me the Welsh thing is quite a personal thing, and therefore it was quite an emotionally sort of fulfilling thing to do.
Yeah,
I think as well as being an adult language learner, actually you mentioned it. Oh, this is what you need to go away and do. Like being able to advise on strategies for learning because you've been doing them. Before I came to Spain, I had been living with my parents for a while, and I was preparing to come to Spain. I likewise had very little Spanish, and bless them, they tolerated a kitchen full of Post-it notes, and like all the cupboards in the kitchen were labelled with their contents in Spanish. for the.
I did the wee post-it notes with everything in the kitchen, yeah.
The month prior to me leaving, my first flatmate in Spain put up with the fact that the fridge was covered in notes, Spanish notes, because I would go to the kitchen in the morning, I'd put my coffee pot on the stove, and I would turn and face the fridge, and I would revise whatever it was I was learning that week, because it would be on the fridge. So I say the same thing to my students. Like if it's, if they're adult students, right, well then you put something on the fridge, or whatever you think you're going to be sat or stood for a while, put something in the toilet. I make same thing with the teenagers. Okay, so you'll be in front of the mirror for a while, I imagine, doing makeup, straightening hair, doing whatever with your spots, whatever it is that teenagers do in front of the mirror. Well, put 3 phrasal verbs on the mirror.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to be for 5 minutes, or you might as well put something in there so that, that these little things, and it sounds stupid, but it works.
Yeah.
But I only knew it works because I did it.
Yeah. Boss Journeys was the one I did. It's helped me quite a bit. If you can get graded podcasts in your target language, it is unbelievable how effective they are, even for the short journeys. Because, I mean, most of it, they're not lengthy, and that's sort of the point.
15-20 minutes is ideal, but you have to watch out. You have to watch out for when you're repeating back in public. I've definitely done that. Oh yeah.
There was actually, I remember when I was in Orense, I was sitting on a park bench by the river, and I was listening to a Spanish podcast, and I was like responding to it, if you know what I mean. It was.
I do know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, a tap on the shoulder, and there was 2 women walk past. It was like early Saturday morning, and they were like, they had picked up on whatever it was I had said. It's like, oh, had you seen that thing on TV last night? And I'm like, what?
No.
And I'm sitting there going, don't have a TV in the flat, but I'm going to converse with you. I'm actually listening to a podcast talking about this. And she's like, oh yeah, that was on last night. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Coincidence.
This is the weirdest coincidence ever. But yeah, we ended up, I got her to explain it was a film about something. And I got her to explain it all to me. And I'm like, oh, fair enough. This is kind of cool. This is just the weirdest coincidence I've ever had.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. That is, because that works nicely with just immersion as well. I was I would just keep myself. I was commuting in and out of the centre of Valencia when I first came and worked in Spain. So I'd be on the metro and mouthing. Mouthing to myself. I don't think I actually ever spoke out loud. Maybe I did. I don't think I did. But definitely I was mouthing to myself, which probably is more disturbing than someone sitting there very badly saying, me llamo Chris. But I was mouthing it to myself instead. I don't know which is more disturbing. Like tips and tricks like this. I also think, actually, I made myself do the exam, to do DELE exams. And that's also been useful in terms of teaching, because it's made me think about not only being a student of language, but also an exam candidate. And what it's like to sit there and do this horrifically difficult exam in a foreign language and feel really stupid at times, preparing for exams. And, the horror of the oral exam. Yeah. You can't imagine it. You have to do one to know what that feels like. And
it's one hell of a feeling of insecurity, isn't it?
Absolutely, especially as an adult. And it puts you in those, it not just puts you, it forces you into those shoes that you put students into every day of the week.
And it puts you into this. I suddenly felt like a little child in school again. And it was and like, it's kind of weird for me to feel little when I'm 190 centimeters, but believe me, you do.
and even teaching things like reading use of English, I can say, when I do this, but in Spanish, this is what I actually do. I'm not just teaching you a method that just to get you through the lesson. This is what I do. I was doing it this morning. This is the part that I hate the most. I hate it in Spanish as well. Comments like this, and so look at you. I'm preparing, and I think also it there's another emotional intelligence link with the students now.
Yeah, exactly. Because if they see that you're struggling with the exact same thing, or fair enough, you may be the level above or below them, I think you get them on your side a lot more if they know that you're doing the same thing as well, which can be quite a there was me and another student. There was a student. I was a one-on-one student I had last year. Sort of challenged each. We had this thing. I didn't give him homework, but we challenged each other to do certain things in our target language, which I think worked really, really well.
That's nice. That's nice.
You know, we were challenging each because so I would write him a letter, then he would write me a letter back at B2 level. So it was like,
cool.
You're sort of tandem teaching and learning.
Definitely. I found
especially with adult students, it's such a stronger thing to do. It makes the class better. I mean, let's be honest.
I found that with my B2 teenage group last year, because I was doing my B2 at the same time, right? And, I'd share with them my mock exam marks, or I would share with them, I did an exercise this morning. Or I did this exercise. I'm teaching them a gap text exercise, and I did one that morning as some homework for my teacher, and I sort of tell them my score and say, but what is the difference between law and lair? And they'd all laugh at me. But we were on the journey together. I was down at their level and they were up at mine, if you want to put it, in those terms. But I think that is, it takes a bit of confidence to be able to go into your students and show them that weakness. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
It buys you so much trust and understanding from them. Oh wait, this dude, he's doing the same thing as us. He doesn't think he's above us somewhere. As this teacher in the clouds, he's bringing himself down to our sort of studying level as well. And I think it's therefore beneficial for you as a teacher, just as a teacher to be engaged. If you have monolingual students, to be engaged with their language, and as a human being. But also, I think it also helps your students if you're thinking in terms of their language.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go into the language we speak and how we learned them then. Obviously, English was my L1. It's what my parents speak. It's what we spoke at home. So I learned that as a child learns their L1, I suppose. I grew up in Cardiff, capital of Wales. For listeners outside of Wales, we actually have our own language. It's not an accent or a dialect. If you look it up, you'll find lots of consonants and be very confused. So there was quite a Welsh atmosphere there for around, not when I was necessarily born, but as a young kid, the Welsh Language Act came in and some Welsh started appearing in public places. My primary school, although it was an English medium school, looking back, basically every teacher there was either Welsh first language or it was their strong second language. There was a very Welsh atmosphere at that primary school. And then by high school, my first exposure to having foreign or at least not L1 literature being used in the classroom. And that was a great feeling of achievement as well. Studied French and German at high school. French was lots of verb tables. And I'll be honest, didn't really enjoy studying it. German, I really enjoyed. I had a teacher who was really interesting. And we just did lots and lots and lots of role plays. So we would study lots of vocabulary and the grammar for a certain situation, and then we'd be given time to come up with role plays in groups, which we would then have to perform from memory, and that she would videotape and make us watch them back. It was pretty brutal.
What age when you were watching yourself back in an L2?
11, 12.
Yikes.
It was pretty brutal, but do you know what? It worked.
Okay.
It contextualized it. Like, we were learning language for a purpose. We didn't live in Germany, so we couldn't go out and use German, but we were learning the vocabulary and the structures to then use in a specific role play. And yeah, as high school kids, no, I don't think it was that much fun, especially in sort of class of 30, typical comprehensive school sort of setting. No, it wasn't tons of fun. But I could definitely see the value, and perhaps in a different delivery or in a different setting, I think those sort of things worked really nicely. And I've used them in the classroom with smaller groups and everything else, and it does work quite nicely. German at uni, I did a year of it as a foreign language course. Lots of grammar, very little production, incredibly boring, and put me off carrying on. As an adult, I came back to Welsh more formally and did some adult learning. And it was mostly conversation, lots of drilling. And I immersed myself a lot in the TV, the radio, and reading. And that's what I was saying. The first time I sort of read a book cover to cover in another language was in Welsh. And it was a lot of fun. It was for a purpose. It was enjoyable. And then when I came to Spain, well, I've learnt by immersion, a little bit of formal study, and out of necessity, and I practice it all the time. And now I'm looking at Portuguese. Currently on just Duolingo, and also practicing with a friend of mine who speaks Brazilian Portuguese, Victor, who was in the pod a few episodes ago, who makes me practice. So I think the reason I wanted to say all of that was that each of those experiences has given me as a teacher things that I will and things that I won't do in the classroom. Not a fan of giving big grammar lectures, not a fan of giving verb tables to kids. I'm a fan of giving authentic and especially literature to students. I think that works. I am a fan of lots of conversation, lots of production, because I think my experience as a language learner was that's what worked and that's what was enjoyable and that's what kept me coming back for more.
Nice. Yeah, I think with my language journey as well, you need to, for when I first moved to Spain, it's like, yeah, I had all these grammar books and all this grammar in my head, but it was like, and what can I do with this? You know, I can just have a conversation where I sound like a semi-educated dog to the guy I get my breakfast off in the morning, the coffee and croissant, but I know all the grammar.
I think
so
that's the thing about, that's the thing, if I can just add to that, I think that's the thing about the verb tables is that 20 years later, I'm fairly confident that if you gave me some of the basic verbs in French with some gaps in tables, I could still put the correct things in the gaps.
Right.
But I'm not convinced I'd know what any of the verbs meant.
Yeah.
I know that, you know, and I think that's the point, is I can maybe remember it, but it's not remembered used to me.
My language learning journey was slightly different. So grew up in the north of Ireland, where the setup for, when was the Welsh Act come through?
93.
93. The Welsh language, it is what the Irish can only dream of. We were very monolingual growing up, 80s and 90s. First experience of another language would have probably been Spanish, actually. But in a school setting, there was no languages in primary school. In high school, you had to do 5 years of one language, which was your GCSE language, and then your first 3 years you had another language. So German I did for 3 years. Me and the teacher did not get on at all. So basically her teaching method was so poor, I thought, looking back on it, that I just stopped in first year. I just did nothing for her. No homework, no work, nothing. Did get on with the head of languages from the GCSEs for French, but it was quite, I remember writing a lot of letters about my daily routine. Don't remember much more than that. From a standard textbook. After that, that was about 2003. Didn't look at another language again until I moved away from computer science to become an English teacher, funnily enough. Because it was all programming languages. So I had all these in my head. You know, I would dream. You know, the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Well, computer programmers dream a bit like what you see in the Matrix. So yeah, I then get into learning Spanish, which was gradual, heavily grammatical at the start. Wasn't too keen on it until I just thought, I want to see this in use. So therefore started sort of annoying people in the park to talk to them and stuff. And sort of went from there. And then had one-to-one classes with a couple of teachers. Started watching TV, listening to podcasts, and reading. Reading was the number one thing for learning Spanish for me. I was cleaning off like issues in National Geographic and books, and you know, like you wouldn't believe, which was really, really impressive. It wasn't only until I came home, rather embarrassingly, this year for my second master's that the university were offering Irish classes for A1. Now, we don't speak our technically native language here, but there is an extremely strong resurgence of it. There's a lot of Irish language culture. Gaeltachts are appearing a lot more in places. And it's like trying to get a place in an Irish class right now is really hard because they're all selling out so fast.
Wow.
But it's still, we dream of having the situation that Wales does with their language. So I got my A1 before Christmas. And it's
well done! Congratulations.
It's a cool language, like it is. It's one of those things because I'm so used to European language, and it's such an older language as well. Just completely different grammar and you think prepositions. You know what? See when I go back to the classroom, and someone's having difficulty with prepositions, I'm going to go, yes, English prepositions aren't great. Oh, where do you see this? It's definitely an eye opener learning a much older language as well. And then now for a bit of crack, I'm trying my hand at Norwegian. Been there a good few times. Been on Scandinavia quite a bit. And I just think it's such a cool language. It's the more of it you learn, it feels so much more similar to English than I probably first thought. Pronunciation, spelling. Well, maybe it's better because I've been doing Irish pronunciation spelling, which is an absolute nightmare. So maybe Norwegian's not as bad, but I mean pronunciation and spelling in Irish is just what is going on. There's less sounds and there's less. Nearly every language has less sounds than English, but even still, it's when you first start learning it, it feels you got to remember the rules like B and F, or word letters that go together change a sound completely. It's interesting. Languages don't come naturally to my brain. But see, based on what you were saying earlier with good errors, I think one of the things that actually put me off a language in the first place was when I was in high school, so I'd have been about 11 or 12, and you were not, under no circumstances were you allowed to be wrong. You either got it right or you didn't do it. So if you didn't understand it, that's your problem. You're not going to be explained, this is right because this is wrong because that was it. You were not allowed to be wrong whatsoever. And if you were wrong, you were seriously chastised. You were really...
See, in what way is that helpful?
School. Yeah.
In what way is that helpful?
Yeah, and it's like, looking back, especially as a teacher, looking back on it, you're like, no wonder I didn't know work for 3 years in German. If a month into learning a new language in a brand new school, we came from like a little culty primary school to a big high school,
Got it.
So it's like, why would you do that to a 12-year-old? Why would you get a 12-year-old in front of 30 students who he doesn't know and chastises him for having a really bad homework because he didn't understand a new language? I was like, I had no clue. So I did no work for her for 3 years.
Yeah, you're right.
It's one of the most important things because, learning a language is not an easy thing to do. It is genuinely a hard thing. And I do think that it is a natural human reaction to not want to be wrong. But it is one of the major learning processes of a language. And there is that self-awareness, there's the self-insecurity, there is, basically, especially when you're talking to natives of that language, there is the trying not to make a tit of yourself as well, in case you do get embarrassed. So, it's quite a public and it's quite a personal thing to learn a language.
And I would link that back to the personal, the embarrassing, the putting yourself out there. I think I would link that back to the reason why I tell my students that I learn that I'm learning Spanish, that I'm studying, that I'm a candidate for exams, that I make mistakes. It's the reason why I show them that I mess up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the reason why I use Spanish in the classroom sometimes, because
Mm-hmm.
as well, it shows them, oh, hey, his accent's weird,
Mm-hmm.
but I understand him. He's making loads of mistakes, but I can understand him. He's making loads of mistakes, and I can correct him. Oh, that's awesome. You know,
I
but it's not like
think,
that. But Chris, yeah, what's the question? It's not like that. It's like this. Oh,
mm-hmm.
did you understand me? Yes. I've done the exercise. I wanted just to tell you your Spanish was wrong. Oh, okay. Thanks for that.
I think
again,
that the most important thing, especially with learners, I think I know certain exams are going to disagree with this, and certain exams will agree with this, is that intelligibility is the most important thing. If you can understand the content,
yep.
Don't sweat the small stuff of, oh, you used the wrong grammar there, or you could have used. The thing that annoys me is you could have used a higher level bit of grammar here. It's like, well, no. I've got my point across. I know what
my point.
I've done. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
need to have used like the passive voice when I could have just used something else. You still understood me perfectly clear.
And it's like I was saying to some students actually just last night, C1 class, and sort of saying actually, this little grammar corner here, I like to call them grammar corners. This little grammar corner here. Yeah, pull this out of the bag in the exam. Like put this in your formal writing. That'll be lovely. Please don't ever use it in reality. People will think you're weird.
What was the grammar point?
It was the subjunctive in English. Anything other than, come on. If I were you, that's the way you say it. But in any other person or any other case, you don't say if he were to go. Nobody says that.
Yeah.
Definitely use it in your writing and show, oh, look, I know the English subjunctive in conditional, but only in the writing and never say it. Because although it's correct, people think you're weird.
I think it's quite a regional thing as well. I always find it quite funny when I'm teaching ought to. Because I always make a joke out of it going, you need to know what this is. You need to know what it means, when it can be used, and how, if you ever want to, use it yourself. And I always tell my students, the only time in my entire life I have ever used the words ought to is when I'm teaching it. I have never used it in 30 plus years of my life. Just be aware of what it is and try to understand it. But I'm never going to use it.
Things that I find useful. You mentioned them earlier. We talked about them. Podcasts, absolutely crucial for my early acquisition of Spanish was using podcasts. Didactic ones to begin with, and then later sort of real content ones. And then later on, it's the real stuff. It's authentic stuff, like graded readers, watching series. When I was first getting into really watching stuff in Welsh, I would watch. I went through this process of watching the program in Welsh with English subtitles, then watching it with Welsh subtitles, then watching it with no subtitles. And I found that kind of like walk through process is what I then did. The same thing with Spanish. I started watching Spanish shows on Netflix with English subtitles, then with Spanish subtitles, and then without. And like sort of letting yourself bit by bit get into it is the way, and just talking and making tons of mistakes. Yeah.
I think for me, make tons of mistakes and be all right with it is one. For me, reading was the big one. Read, and read some more. As long as you can find it interesting. I did the Netflix thing as well. I think I must have watched La Casa de Papel, God knows how many times. But it did really help. I remember I used to be a much bigger fan of football than I am now, for reasons I won't go into. So the Spanish commentary certainly helped, and speaking to people, on match days and stuff. I think the biggest one for me is there was a lecturer in one of the London universities. Now I can't remember which university it is. He has his own website for teaching Spanish. So he has his own videos, his own podcasts, his own books as well. Actually, I used his stuff is designed to get you through the intermediate plateau.
I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember his name either.
Juan Fernandez.
Yeah.
On 1001 Reasons to Learn Spanish. Yeah, 1001 Reasons to Learn Spanish.com. And he does the podcast Español con Juan as well, which I have found absolutely superb. Genuinely loved his stuff. So yeah, if you look at Juan Fernandez's material, it's all entirely free. His books, his podcasts, his courses, he has stories, he has a YouTube channel, very entertaining, very interesting. And I find his stuff brilliant to use.
Thank you for listening to this first episode of Phrasally Verbocious Season 3. We're looking forward to recording more episodes of this season. And please get in touch with your comments and questions as always.
Yeah,
thank you for listening.
Thank you and goodbye.